In the quiet suburban neighborhood where every house seemed to echo with perfection, Sarah had always been the picture of happiness. She had a loving husband, Tom, and two beautiful children. But beneath the surface of their seemingly ideal life, a storm was brewing. Tom, once a devoted spouse, had fallen into the arms of someone else. The affair started innocently enough. An old friend from college, Rachel, who had returned to town. Their catch-ups over coffee turned into late-night phone calls. And soon, those calls evolved into stolen moments in hotels, away from prying eyes. At first, Sarah noticed little changes. Tom came home late from work, distracted, and sometimes the glimmer in his eyes seemed absent. She brushed it off as the pressures of work. But when she found a small, unfamiliar lipstick stain on his shirt collar one evening, the pieces began to fall into place. Sarah confronted him, her voice trembling with disbelief and hurt. Tom didn't deny it. His guilt was palpable, but it didn't change the reality of his betrayal. The emotional weight of his infidelity crushed her, but what hurt more was the realization that Tom had always seemed so perfect to her. He had been her best friend, her partner, and the father of their children. Yet, somewhere along the way, he had become someone else entirely. The affair was the ultimate betrayal, the breaking point of years of trust. As Sarah tried to salvage their marriage, she found herself unable to look at Tom the same way again. His apologies, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't erase the raw wound that now defined their relationship. The love she had for him became tainted by the image of him with another woman, a woman who had, in her mind, become the embodiment of everything she had lost. In the weeks that followed, Tom made attempts to reconcile, but the damage was irreversible. He begged for forgiveness, tried to rekindle the flame of their early years together, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to forgive him. The memories of the betrayal haunted every moment they shared, and she realized that the trust they had once built was now shattered beyond repair. Tom's affair was not just a mistake. It was a revelation that sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, there's no room for forgiveness when the heart has been broken beyond repair. And for Sarah, that realization was the beginning of her journey to find herself again, without the man who had once been everything to her. As the months passed, Sarah found herself grappling with the aftermath of the betrayal. The house, once a sanctuary of shared memories, now felt like a prison. Each room echoed with the weight of lost trust, and the silence between her and Tom was deafening. He had moved out temporarily, trying to give her space, but Sarah knew that his absence wasn't a solution. It was a reflection of the larger issue. Their relationship had been irreparably altered. During this time, Sarah began to reclaim pieces of herself she had long neglected. She reconnected with old friends, rediscovered hobbies she had once enjoyed, and even started therapy to work through the emotional turmoil. She realized that for so long her identity had been intertwined with Tom's, and now, as painful as it was, she had to find a way to stand on her own. But Tom, despite his guilt, was still desperate to make things right. He moved back into the house, convinced that his love for her would heal the wounds he had caused. He had even cut ties with Rachel, promising never to speak to her again. Yet, every time Sarah looked at him, she saw the man who had shattered her heart. She couldn't erase the image of him with another woman, the trust he betrayed, and the promises he had broken. One evening, after weeks of therapy and attempts at communication, Sarah and Tom sat down to talk for what felt like the last time. Tom apologized again, his voice filled with regret. He spoke of how much he loved her, how he wanted to fix their marriage. But Sarah, with tears in her eyes, told him that she couldn't forget what had happened. She couldn't continue living a life where the foundation of their love was built on lies. "I wanted to believe in us, Tom," Sarah said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. "But every time I look at you now, I don't see the man I married. I see someone who chose to betray me, and I can't live like that." Tom begged her to reconsider, to give him another chance. But Sarah knew deep down that forgiveness, if it was ever possible, wasn't something she could offer him now. The love they had once shared had been eclipsed by the weight of his betrayal. There was no room for forgiveness. Not anymore. In the end, Sarah made the difficult decision to let go. She filed for divorce, determined to find her own peace and rebuild her life. Tom, though devastated, knew that his actions had led them to this point. His affair had destroyed everything they had worked for, and no amount of remorse could undo the damage. The divorce was painful, but it was also a turning point for Sarah. She learned to forgive herself for staying in a marriage that no longer served her, and slowly, the pain began to fade. She became stronger, more independent, and more confident in her ability to move forward. The journey wasn't easy, but with time, Sarah realized that sometimes the only way to heal from betrayal is to walk away and start anew. As for Tom, he never truly recovered from the loss of Sarah. The affair had cost him more than just a wife. It had cost him the life he had once known. And as he watched Sarah grow into the woman she was meant to be, he was left to confront the reality of his choices, with no one but himself to blame. In the end, their story was a reminder that some wounds are too deep to heal, and that not all relationships are meant to survive betrayal. For Sarah, the most important lesson was that she deserved better, and she was finally ready to give herself the life she had always dreamed of. As the years passed, Sarah's life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. She embraced the freedom that came with her decision, no longer tethered by the weight of betrayal. Her children, though initially confused and hurt by the separation, grew to understand that their mother's happiness and well-being were the most important things she could offer them. With Tom out of the picture, Sarah poured all her love and energy into being the best mother she could be. The small moments of joy, the laughter at family dinners, the quiet evenings spent reading together, became the foundation of their new life. But moving on wasn't as simple as it seemed. The scars of the past lingered, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to resurface at unexpected times. There were days when Sarah would catch herself thinking about the years she had spent with Tom, the life they had built together, and wonder what it would have been like if things had turned out differently. There were moments when the anger would bubble up again, memories of the betrayal flooding her mind, reminding her of the hurt that had pushed her to make such a painful decision. One afternoon, out of the blue, Sarah received a message from Tom. It was simple, a brief text asking how she was doing, if she had been able to move on. At first, she hesitated. The thought of engaging with him again was unsettling. But curiosity got the better of her, and she replied, keeping the conversation light. They exchanged pleasantries for a few days, with Tom speaking of how he was still adjusting to life without her. He had tried dating, but nothing felt right. He had even gone to therapy, working on his issues, trying to understand the reasons behind his infidelity. Despite the years that had passed, Sarah could sense the same desperation in his words. It was as though he still couldn't fully grasp the depth of his betrayal, that it wasn't just about the affair itself, but the erosion of the trust that had held their relationship together. He had hurt her in a way that no amount of apologies could undo. But Sarah had changed, and with that change came a realization that the past no longer held the power it once did over her. One evening, as they spoke on the phone, Tom's voice trembled as he admitted something that had been weighing heavily on him for years. "I'll never forgive myself for what I did, Sarah. I ruined everything. I can't fix it, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. I've spent so much time regretting my mistakes, and I just wanted to tell you that you deserve so much more than what I gave you." His words echoed in Sarah's mind, stirring a complex mixture of emotions. She had spent so much time hating him for what he had done, but hearing his pain and remorse, she realized that forgiveness was not something she needed to offer him. It was something she had already given herself. The journey of healing had never been about Tom, but about reclaiming her own life. "I don't need your forgiveness, Tom," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "What happened between us is in the past, and I've made peace with it. I'm happy now, and that's enough for me. You don't have to fix what's already broken. What matters now is that I've learned to move on." The conversation ended with an uneasy silence, both of them knowing that closure had finally come, but in a way neither had anticipated. Tom had apologized, and Sarah had accepted it, not as a way to patch things up, but as a moment of understanding that they were both forever changed by what had happened. In the months that followed, Sarah continued to focus on her own personal growth. She traveled to places she had always wanted to visit, started a new career path that filled her with purpose, and even met someone new, a kind man who respected her strength and independence. The relationship was different, built on mutual respect and understanding, without the baggage of past betrayals. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was enough. As for Tom, he never truly found the peace he was searching for. He remained a shadow in her past, a reminder of the lesson that some people, no matter how much they regret their actions, cannot be allowed back into the lives they've already destroyed. Sarah had learned the hard way that some betrayals, once committed, leave an indelible mark on both people. And while she had forgiven herself and moved on, Tom would have to live with the consequences of his choices forever. Sarah's journey was one of reclaiming her own worth, of realizing that the capacity to heal and forgive resides within herself, and that sometimes letting go is the only way to truly move forward. She had no room for forgiveness in her heart for the man who had once been everything to her, but she had enough room for herself, and that was all she needed to start living her life again. Years had passed since Sarah made the decision to leave Tom behind. The sting of betrayal had dulled, replaced by a deep sense of self-worth and peace she had long forgotten. Her children had grown into young adults, both thriving with the security that their mother's love and resilience had provided. They had come to respect and admire her for the strength she had shown, especially when navigating the heartache that once seemed insurmountable. As Sarah's life continued to evolve, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She thought about her younger self, the woman who had once believed that love could fix anything, that forgiveness could heal all wounds. But now, she understood something deeper. True healing didn't come from clinging to the past or forgiving those who had wronged you. It came from the ability to choose yourself, to take ownership of your life and choose the path that allowed you to flourish, independent of the pain that others may have caused. One spring afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from Rachel, the woman Tom had been with during their affair. At first, Sarah hesitated, unsure of what this call could mean. Rachel had never reached out to her directly before, and the idea of speaking to her now stirred up a mix of curiosity and old wounds. But she was no longer the woman who had been devastated by Tom's betrayal. She was a woman who had reclaimed her strength and her life. With a calm resolve, she answered the phone. "Sarah," Rachel's voice came through, soft and uncertain. "I know this may be a lot to ask, but I wanted to apologize. I've carried guilt for so long for what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I regret hurting you and your family. I never intended to destroy what you had." Sarah listened quietly, the pain from the past bubbling up but not overwhelming her. She had come so far, and hearing Rachel's words, so raw and sincere, reminded her how far she had come. She had lived with the narrative of betrayal for so long, but now she could rewrite it on her own terms. She didn't need to carry anyone's guilt but her own. "I appreciate you reaching out, Rachel," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I've spent years letting go of that pain. It's a chapter that's closed for me. I've forgiven myself, and I've learned to live without the weight of that betrayal. You don't need to carry that guilt anymore either." The conversation ended amicably, with Rachel expressing her thanks for Sarah's understanding. It wasn't a moment of grand reconciliation, but it was a moment of mutual respect. Two women, both affected by the same man, now standing on their own paths, free from the past. Months later, Sarah attended a reunion with some old friends. It had been years since she had seen them, and as they gathered around, catching up on the twists and turns of each other's lives, one of her friends asked how she had moved on after everything with Tom. Sarah smiled, a quiet confidence in her eyes. It wasn't about moving on, really. It was about letting go. Once I realized that the person I was waiting for forgiveness from was myself, everything changed. I learned that forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes, It's about giving yourself the freedom to let go of what's no longer serving you. Her friends nodded, and Sarah could see the admiration in their eyes. She had become an embodiment of resilience, someone who had faced unimaginable betrayal but had risen above it. They admired her for not just surviving but thriving. Looking around at the life she had built, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had built something beautiful and entirely her own, without relying on anyone else to validate her worth. The pain of the past no longer had a hold on her. It had shaped her, yes, but it had not defined her. Tom, wherever he was, had long since faded from her thoughts. His attempts at contacting her had grown less frequent, and Sarah had long stopped responding. She had no need for closure from him anymore. The only closure she needed was the one she had given herself. She had made peace with the past, and now her future was hers to shape. In the years that followed, Sarah traveled more, found new hobbies, and embraced life in ways she had once put aside. She found love again, not in a person but in herself, in the freedom that came with independence. Her children were thriving, happy in their own lives, and Sarah felt that peace she had always longed for. She had become someone who understood that the real power in life lies in the choices we make and the way we choose to move forward, no matter what challenges we faced. Tom's betrayal, the affair, the hurt, and the years of questioning were all part of her story, but they no longer held any power over her. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, not because she had forgiven others, but because she had learned to forgive herself and, in doing so, had found the strength to move on. And in the end, that was the most powerful lesson of all. There's no room for forgiveness in a life that's already full of self-love and peace.